Youth and spirit. It seems that my whole life has been set up for this exact moment in time. It seems that for my whole life I have been on a never-ending search for the truth. But the truth of what? Since the early 80s, I have been interested in and have examined just about every conspiracy theory or mystery that had surfaced. Unidentified flying objects, Area 51, the Bermuda Triangle, GMOs, the Loch Ness Monster, cloning, ghosts, Bigfoot, mysterious disappearances, time travel, pyramids, and yes, even all kinds of aliens and their underground bases. I also studied most religions. I was on the fence with everything, even if I denied it to myself. I say that because I always leaned towards believing in most of these things, even if I didn't have an experience with them, which would make these things truth. And that in itself isn't very shrewd of me. Just because one believes something doesn't mean it's real or true. It is the experience that makes something real to an individual. For the past 2 years, it has come to my attention that facts, truth, and beliefs change. How can something be a fact if it changes? Having an experience is more knowing than listening to others' facts or opinions. Listening to others' accounts, including mine, does not make it a fact. It does for the person having the experience, but to others it is only a fantasy or enlightening story that may spark a future experience for the person listening or help them in some other way. But it is still not a fact. The thing is, having an experience is not something we can presently command to happen. All we can do is explore other people's accounts of events until we are blessed with an experience. And when that does happen, your perception of the reality you live in will change greatly. I was always exploring and listening to others' accounts of events, hoping one day I might have an experience. I did. And I have grown more in tune with the more recent personal experiences and forgot all about my childhood experiences. Looking back on my life, I did have paranormal experiences happen as a young child. When I was very young, I had several experiences where I was speaking with something or someone. I have no recollection to what the conversations were about. I just feel like they were always around if I needed them. I felt safe with them around. Most of what I remember is seeing one single bright tiny spark of a light, but my feelings were that it was a group of beings. And now that is how I am comfortable speaking about them. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I had an experience that I can recall quite clearly, even though others in my family seem to vaguely recall the incident and some don't recall it at all. You will have to finish the book to understand the significance of that statement. I was in the front yard by myself, and I distinctively remember that I was playing cowboys and Indians until I heard the police siren, and I quickly changed the game to cops and robbers. This simple change in games seems to be a trigger point for me. That simple change made it a significant part of my life worth remembering. The sirens were becoming louder, and I felt an urge to look up. I looked up and saw the familiar bright gleaming spark of light hovering over my head. It conveyed to me that it also wanted to play, and suggested that we hide from the bad guys behind my father's red Volkswagen Beetle. I immediately agreed and ran behind the car. The light then conveyed to me firmly, yet pleasantly at the same time, to hide behind the wheel of the car and to stay out of sight. I immediately did as it asked. After a minute or so, I looked up at it and explained to it that I wanted to see what was going on. The light was deliberate, yet calm when they answered in the negative. I really wanted to see what was going on, but I knew not to disobey my friends, the spark of light. The sirens became so loud that I knew they had to be close. I looked back up at this light, which to me seemed like a perfectly normal thing to do. I was not afraid by any means, and I knew I had to listen to its direction. It wasn't overpowering me. It let me make my decisions. But its suggestions would have been just as obvious as if the directions were coming from a parent. I mean, there were police cars chasing someone near my house, and I felt safe hiding with this spark of light. I asked them once again if I could see what was going on, and they replied that I could, but only when they said that I could. I was very excited. I asked, "Now?" "Not yet," was the reply. I waited a bit, and again I asked, and they said yes. I threw my head around the wheel of the car, and I saw a tall man running in between my house and the neighbor's house. They, or rather it, called me back behind the wheel of the car. I sat up, just staring at the light. They told me they were leaving, and I should stay right where I was until my mother came outside. I agreed, and they vanished. When my mother came out from the house, I ran from behind the car and jumped into her arms. She held me tight and approached a police officer getting out of his car as a number of other police cars started pulling up in front of my house. I don't recall the conversation itself, just bits and pieces. All I kept doing was pointing where the man ran. Eventually, a couple of officers took my advice and ran between the houses. I don't know how much time had passed, but at some point I heard my mother talking with someone on the telephone saying that the officer told her that they knew this man and that he was very dangerous and so desperate that if I was seen by him, he would have grabbed me and took me as his hostage. When I was about 10 or 11, I really believed I could be a decent poet or artist. I wrote some pretty advanced stuff for a young boy that age. When I wrote, I felt inspired, and I would imagine my spiritual friends guiding me to write the words. For many years, I carried 5 copybooks around filled with poems. Sadly, I haven't been able to relocate them, and they are not around today. One of the more artistic things I did was draw many cartoonish, make-believe characters, one on each page of a copybook. I remember spending a lot of time on these pictures. Some were animal-like, and others were machine-like, and I always imagined them interacting with each other. Some 15 plus years later, I was in a toy store staring at one of the animal-like creatures I drew back then. My mind was disordered. I was confused and didn't understand how that was possible. I wouldn't have been interested in it at all, but the one drawing was extremely accurate. No, it was exactly what I drew. I mean, scary exact. Amazingly, I also initially blew it off. I bought these things called Pokemon cards for my daughter. As time went by, I started to take a closer look at these Pokemon cards. I didn't really know what to think. I recall some of the pictures being similar to the 100 plus pictures I drew over 15 years earlier, but there was no way to be sure. I wasn't really that taken by the situation and just blew it off. As soon as time allowed, I traveled over to my mother's house and dug up all the old books I wrote and drew in. This is when I took the 5 copybooks for prosperity. Unfortunately, the book that I drew the characters in was nowhere to be found. This group of what may have been spiritual beings left me around the age of 12. Or maybe society got too close and I had to imagine them away. Either way, they showed up again at about the age of 19, when I was seriously questioning my Catholic upbringing. I got down on my hands and knees, pounding the floor and screaming at the air, telling Jesus I wanted the answer. I demanded an answer. The light was not as brilliant as when I was a child, and I felt it may not have been physically there at all when it told me very instinctively that I was to research and do the work for myself. And ever since that day, I have been on a search for the truth.